Welcome to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Alex Taek-Gwang Lee, a professor of philosophy and cultural studies at Kyung Hee University in South Korea, where he directs both the Center for Cross-Cultural Studies and the Global Center for Technology in Humanities. He is also visiting professor at the Center for Applied Philosophy, Politics and Ethics at the University of Brighton, and global expert at Jan Evangelista Purkin University in the Czech Republic. In 2021, he served as program manager for the Venice Biennale of Architecture. His English language monographs include Communism After Deleuze, Made in Nowhere, Essays on the Asiatic Modes of Existence, and Colors of the Concepts. He has also contributed numerous chapters to edited volumes and regularly writes for eFlux and other media platforms. He has also written extensively in Korean with more than 12 books to his name. I welcome Alex Taek-Gwang Lee to Savage Minds. I'm very excited to have you on the show, Alex, because the issues that you raise in all of your writing are, I believe, essential for people to discuss in the West, because there are a lot of misnomers, misunderstandings also about what communism is and what that means. And you see this when you watch any kind of right-wing or center-ish commentator in the United States. It becomes clear within the uttering of the words, he's a communist or he's a Marxist, that the person has no clue what they're talking about, because a lot of things that they're critiquing are actually things they agree with, because, again, we saw this during lockdown, where the people raising class issues in the United States were not on the left. It was people like Tucker Carlson talking about the poor and disenfranchised, the workers unable to organize, to go outside, to protest. He was actually pro-protest. We saw a collapse of the neoliberal left. I mean, they're not leftists, but they think they are. So I sort of make that name up for them. And people on the right who were the more active. The neoliberal left were lockdown, baby, lockdown. They were, before lockdown, my body, my choice. During lockdown, you have no rights to your body. I decide. So I think it would be useful if we could talk about even the article that brought me to writing you, which was titled Marxism and Manipulation on the Limits of Rockhill's Critique of Western Marxism. Could you begin by discussing what Western Marxism means, or what it has come to mean, and what differs this moniker of Western Marxism from what many of us who've read a lot of texts in and around Marxism, not only Marx or not only Engels, what that means?
Western Marxism is, at some point, there's a movement to go back to Marx, himself, against the many interpretation of Marx, which was happened in Soviet Union. It's not actually, the against the achievement or legacy of that kind of socialist movement, which was shaped in Europe, but rather is the try to the revived the original meaning of Marx. So actually, we can ask, what is the original meaning of Marx? Of course, actually, nobody would know this one because Marx already dead, and then what we have at the moment just interpretation. So actually, Western Marxism, in my opinion, try to contextualize Marx within the kind of historical genealogy, or some, in other words, the periodization. That's why actually they try to historicize Marx, and then revive the Marx as some theorist or some philosopher. Of course, Marx was really anti-philosophy, because in those days, 19th century, when Marx, turned to the economy, or some economic study, the philosophy meant, some kind of the ruling class, the theory of population, or some kind of, some theological approach to human being and then society, and then actually defending the kind of Christian or some, the traditional the value. So in this sense, Marx was really critical of philosophy, and then he tried to understand, the capitalism from the kind of economic discourse. So that is actually what Marx did. So Western Marxism is in this sense, the resist against the dogmatization of the Marx, which was happening in the Soviet Union, in particular, actually the Stalin. The quite different from the early stage of socialism in Russia. Stalin, the established the kind of dogmatic understanding of Marx. Actually, it doesn't mean Stalin was stupid and Stalin was evil. Stalin, had some bad intention to destroy socialism, something like that. He didn't the intent to the ruin that socialist movement, but rather he was too much the honest to text. That means he just like the fundamentalist and in any religious movement, the Stalin too much believe in that the text. That means what he gained through his own the practice of that kind of Marxism. You should know that actually 1920, 1930. There was a culmination of socialist movement and communist movement in Europe, and Europe almost reached at a certain level of revolution in those days, and then that's why actually the fascism came up to suppress and then the crash down this kind of the demand from the bottom, and the fascism is in this sense a rival to the socialist and communist movement in those days, and then that actually kind of symbolized the why or somehow the European revolution failed in those days. So so Stalin also had this idea, and then that's why he turned to very passive way to protect the kind of legacy of socialism, and then he chose wrong actually the decision. He decided quite wrong way, so that's why actually he protected the actual socialist the legacy in its own way, and that is called nowadays is Stalinism. Just it might be called is a necessary process, from the perspective of Stalin, but as a result, his decision destroyed all possibility of socialism and communism. So my position is, we should actually criticize Stalin, or we could actually, reevaluate the kind of the Stalin's legacy, or what Stalin did in terms of dialectical materialism, but in theoretical sense. And then Western Marxism, did actually, the criticize Stalin as a kind of dogmatic, the adaptation of the kind of the socialist text on the the kind of living sphere of that kind of the some movement. So I think Western Marxism, in this sense, try to return to the actual that kind of Marxist text, and then rereading Marx, and in particular, Gabriel Rockhill, one of them, and then following Gabriel Rockhill, also the criticizing Lukács, and then the Frankfurt School came to exist, and then they found out the failure of socialism is not just a problem of the Soviet Union, but sort of some the inner logic of enlightenment as such.
Yes. In fact, I've been talking to a lot of people over the years on the left, some of whom make, in my opinion, ridiculous claims and criticisms of the Frankfurt School, beginning with, but they are philosophers and not proletariat. And I'm thinking, what? That has nothing to do with Marxism. Marxism wasn't like, stop writing poetry, stop making music, stop thinking. In fact, we know that unions regularly would meet to read Marxist texts. A reading was not the purview of the highly educated. It was meant to be reading for all, meeting for all, organizing for all. How would you characterize this rift on the left of those who are very critical of what they call cultural Marxism?
Yeah, if you understand, the wider Western Marxism, I don't like actually this term Western Marxism, but anyway, it's just now we have the official naming, so I don't have any choice, to use this one. So the Western Marxism, um, why? That means actually we should understand why the Western Marxism began to emphasize culture. That's why actually in Britain actually the Western Marxism is called the cultural Marxism. Yeah, it might be proper, much proper actually, the naming of this Marxist the term, um, because they actually started to recognize why the Soviet Union Poland into the kind of dogmatic adaptation of the Marxist doctrine. That means official Marxism in those days, or some orthodox Marxism. And why did actually this the mainstream Marxism the corrupted that kind of dogmatic the idea like a fundamental religious movement. So at their conclusion, actually in particular, the Frankfurt School was, if you read the Adorno, Theodor Adorno's the of course actually he wrote this book with the Horkheimer and the dialectic of enlightenment. The first chapter was about cultural industry. So when the Adorno the mentioned cultural industry, it doesn't mean industry of cultural production. His point is that late capitalism, then the capitalism finally the turn into the cultural something. That means actually that's why he took the case of film in particular. Actually, there's some cinema or some kind of advertisement. So in those days they didn't have social media, but I think that is very precursory study or some approach to the how the media changed the human mind, how the media effect shaped subjectivity. So when they actually discussed culture, they aimed at to analyzing what to analyze that aims at analyzing human desire. So they actually found out even though the Stalin's the socialism, and then even the American capitalism looked like a quite different, but actually they shared same the desire toward the enlightenment. Of course, actually, that might be called the modernity. So I think that actually the Korean case is typically actually adapted for this the Adorno's the approach to the the human desire. Just even we have different regime, North Korea, South Korea, and then we had we had a shared the actually the same desire toward that kind of a normal state, something like that. That is what they discovered. So Lukács's case is more dramatic because he actually found out why the Soviet Union didn't actually achieve what they actually had in the old age. That means before the revolution, when they actually established their regime, that spirit of revolution is gradually fading away, and then that kind of a spirit of a revolution or some revolutionary passion is captured by state power. That was what exactly Lukács quite concerned about in those days. His conclusion is very simple. The class struggle is ended. That is what Lukács believed. But many, the opposite opinion will come up. But anyway, just in those days, Lukács believed that after the Russian Revolution, the within Soviet Union, actually that there wouldn't be any class struggle. And then what would be actually the next the orientation toward the different world. And then his conclusion was labor. So that's why he tried to finish the book about the labor, but he didn't finish it. But that might be called, in my own term, is ontological term. So Frankfurt School also the interest in, this kind of ontological term, but they didn't, properly developed. Ontological term means, the Marxism is related to not just, the discursive or ideological transformation, but sort of, the ontological, transformation. So in this sense, the communism means, not just, you change the some kind of a social system, and then some working class would take over this kind of some means of production. It's not just the some social transformation, but necessarily the transformation human desire. That is what they discovered. Because before actually Russian revolution, and then before the establishment of the Soviet Union, a lot of people in Europe, so-called leftists in those days, believe in working class essentially progressive. But the rise of fascism proved that, the working class not automatically the progressive. The fascism showed that how, the working class, the support. This is what happened these days in the, the United States. How, these working class, the support their enemy. That was big question when, they actually witnessed the rise of fascism and then failure of socialist movement in Europe.
Right. And this also brings up the issues that draw links between what would be cultural Marxism and then more traditional Marxism, because Georg Lukács, in fact, it was a very important actor in this with his History in Class Consciousness, published in 1923, which bridged the gap between empirical class consciousness and the rational objective awareness of a class, the worker identifying him or herself within that class, and the social relations between humans that begin to take on the character of things, reification. And he bridged this idea of commodity fetishism to culture itself, because Lukács was aware of how the reification of culture itself, the mechanisms of culture, were also undergoing the same kind of processes due to capitalism. And this is something that I tell these leftists, Marxists, however they describe themselves, Trotskyites, as being blind to the importance of cultural Marxism. It was a natural extension to class criticism, because obviously capitalism has taken under its mantle the commodification of culture itself, not just the proletariat and not just the unconsciousness making of you are born into this life, yours is to follow our orders, while of course the upper classes, the elite, are able to command and demand, and no questions asked. So I think it's really important that people understand that the culture industry was not something the Frankfurt School invented. It was something they criticized actively.
Actually, that is totally the what I agree, and what I mean actually, the Lukács, the one of the precursor who elaborated on the Marx concept of fetishism. But if you are carefully read, the history and class consciousness, of course, that's why the work was criticized by the Lenin, the kind of messianism, something like that. So, but nowadays, actually, if you reread, the Lukács the works, and then you can find out what he tried to specify, in terms of class consciousness. That means working class, they don't have any class consciousness, no more actually the progressive class. That is his point. So in the class consciousness, what is always reified. So reified, and then this idea also, gave some kind of a clue to the artist as the theory of ideology. So the reification, the Lukács discussed in the book is not just like the Marx just simply mentioned in Capital is a commodity fetishism, but he actually as you said is linked this the concept. He actually used this term reification rather than, fetishism, because he tried to emphasize, the structural of this kind of fetishism, not just, some psychical, the dimension of fetishism, because fetishism is actually the anthropological term. So actually he used this term and then reification, and then emphasize, this reification produced or reproduced by the commodity structure. This is a really, really important theoretical shift, in my opinion, because as you said, it's a commodification. What is the commodification of a working class? Of course, labor power. You must actually sell your labor power, to live, actually, or to survive, the capitalism. So that is what actually the Lukács tried to say. So actually, this commodity structure, what is produced or some reproduces actually this kind of the reification. And then this reification, in this sense, what must be cancelled or must be sublated, by the kind of the working class consciousness. And then, but his point is that how can we gain the class consciousness not only, the among the kind of working class, but also, other class. That means even intellectuals or some artists, or some, even though actually they born into bourgeois like Goethe, and then they could gain this class consciousness. That's why actually the history and the class consciousness revived through the 68 May in France. Is according to Frederick Jameson interview, you can see that there are lots of students in those days. They reread, history and the class consciousness in those days on the street, during their protest. That is really interesting revival. And then that is the meaning of, in my opinion, Western Marxism. Since actually Lukács' the engagement into the Marx or the Marx, the concept, and then Western Marxism developed, their own the understanding of capitalism.
Yes. And in fact, this brings me back to the paper that I contacted you about, Marxism After Manipulation, because this raises other theories that have emerged, especially in recent years. Your paper argues that his exposure of Cold War institutional funding reduces complex theoretical developments to mere manipulation. And this is something that I've seen a lot of in recent years, again, not just Rockhill. Many Marxists are saying that effectively Western Marxism was some kind of controlled opposition. So why do you think that Rockhill's framework acts, as you write, as a gift to right-wing anti-communists? And how does a truly dialectical historical materialism avoid this trap of explanatory substitution?
So there are many layers on taking Rockhill's argument against Western Marxism. Yeah. So, and then many layers. What I mean, actually, the historical fact. Okay, CIA, tried to use the Western Marxism and the French philosophy in 1960 to attack, Soviet Union. That's true. Is even during, but problem is during Second World War, Soviet Union is a part of alliance. That's why in the during actually war, the OSS, actually concentrate on, the anti-fascist front, not rather the destroying actually that kind of alliance. So after the Second World War, William Donovan is one of the officer in the OSS. Maybe he would have some kind of anxiety, the whether after war, the survive, or some, continue on their position or some continue their job. But he actually, the summoned up, some sort of anxiety against, the Soviet Union. That is a communism. What I mean, actually, that's why the Donovan made new agenda. OSS must be, the transforming to another permanent, the information agency. That is the CIA. So it's a Huber also, actually, approved that one, and then he made this CIA. But there is actually the qualitatively difference between OSS and CIA. So Rockhill didn't actually, give a very detailed or some careful approach to these differences. All right. So OSS and then CIA. Okay, OSS will be called some preliminary, the organization to the CIA. But if you actually check out even official website in the CIA, you can find out that there is different. They emphasize difference between OSS and the CIA. CIA is actually designed by the post-war the American government to collect the information for their state security. Of course, in those days, the CIA actually used many intellectual to build up their post-war American system. They call this kind of the attempt as a great American mission. That is that kind of the agenda made today's actually the world order. Now actually we the witnessing this world order in crisis. But anyway, just that is a kind of the world in which we are living on since the Second World War, after Second World War. So many the discipline or many the industry, even the many the international relation, almost all kind of the institution we have today is actually the rely on this kind of a legacy. That means the everything actually would have that kind of touch of CIA. Because CIA actually some kind of the underground organization to manipulate everything to build up this kind of world order after the Second World War. So, but in this sense, the first problem actually we can find it in the Lockwell's the argument is that is okay. This is historical fact, but he the too much use this historical fact to the analyze the Western Marxism. So I don't find any necessary link between this historical fact. CIA funded many the some kind of a secret the project and including some kind of some use of Western Marxism to attack Soviet Union. And then another one is the proper historical development of Western Marxism in theoretical the sense. So actually the Western Marxism is perceived by many the new left after the 1950 and 1960. So if you trace the back that historical development of Western Marxism, you would see the many actually theoretical engagement into the kind of mass movement in particular, and then the third world the third world movement. So they normally actually engaged actually the third world movement, and then they brought the kind of cases. That means actually they found that concrete practice which would happen in the third world in those days. Nowadays it's called the global south. To reformulate or revise the orthodox Marxism. So they didn't intend to cancel the legacy of Marxism. They didn't aimed at the destroyed Marxism, but rather they tried to revive the Marxism in the middle of their kind of the revolutionary failure. So actually European revolution failed. Okay, just the Second World War showed that. The Second World War actually meant the European leftists in those days is a total failure of a revolution. In Europe, but in the middle of the kind of this kind of ruin, the debris of the failed revolution or some the bygone utopianism, they try to revive very the realistic sense of Marxism against that kind of metaphysical or idealized or dogmatic the Marxism. That is what I said, the Rockwell too much underestimate this kind of the participatory sense of Western Marxism. The Western Marxism inspired the many, actually, the mass movement, in particular, the third world, because Marxism is only, the theory, and the Marxism is only thought, which actually emerged in Europe to talk about the third world, and then also to support, the people is a liberation movement in third world, all right? So this is actually I think, another truth of Western Marxism. That's why actually the CIA tried to use Western Marxism. Why did they? We can ask it. Why did they? Why did CIA want to use Western Marxism? Because Western Marxism was powerful, among people who actually desired for that kind of liberation from any oppression. So, and then that's why actually even for the Stalin is a Western Marxist, the criticism of this kind of the dogmatic the aspect of Soviet Union, very the dangerous. That's why here I don't know actually whether it is true or not, but some what I heard that the Stalin the said the Western Marxism is more dangerous than the CIA.
Yeah.
That might be true, but why it was very dangerous for both. The Rockwell's analysis lacked this kind of another side of Western Marxism.
Right. With an argument like that, you could even make the argument that maybe Rockhill is a CIA asset, right? Trying to discourage Western Marxism. But it falls into the age-old criticisms, and I really dislike the bickering. I just have no time for it because it's very clear when you read even Benjamin and his work on photography. His critique of late-stage capitalism at that time is very clear. And you critique Rockhill for holding an uncritical, almost nostalgic defense of what he terms actually existing socialism, something that we also hear quite a bit about, while treating Western Marxist critique as a symptom of capitalist accommodation. Yet what we see within the Frankfurt School, and even since, I mean, can't exclude Zizek from this, is a critique of 20th century and early 21st century accommodation to cultural manipulation, to cultural production, and to the co-optation of culture, the evisceration of culture, when we start to look at, even through political lens, at treaties like NAFTA and free trade agreements. And now anyone can get anything online. Culture has been corroded. Local culture, regional and national cultures have been eroded by capitalism. It's a no-brainer. So I'm very curious as to why Rockhill, and not only Rockhill, I don't want to only focus on him, but many Western Marxists make this claim that somehow cultural critique is an accommodation of capitalism. That's insane.
Good question. So, when I read Rockhill's book, I felt like this is a Marxist version, what I mean, like the Berger Marxist version of the MAGA. So sorry about this. So actually the logic is very similar. If you read any, not just a very clumsy, the critique from the MAGA people or Trump, the supporter. But this actually the most elaborated, the discursive, the analysis of or attack of this kind of Western Marxism, you would find out actually the amazing similarity, between their logic and Locke's logic. Just like that is if you actually read this book and then just he put lots of the data is just he introduce lots of archive, the document is good, but thing is that even that kind of actually the introduction of an document is very limited. What I mean, actually he didn't have any idea about what's going on in Europe in those days and what's going on in the Asia. Even he didn't quote the Cassian Tesapira I just discussed in my article. So he didn't put the more actually the document about the CIS the maneuver in the the non-Western society. That is also made his limit. Another thing is that his logic. Okay, his logic very simple, is very familiar, like that. Okay, just um, the Western Marxist is a bourgeois, is a upper class or some petit bourgeois. That's why even they just stayed very comfortable in university. So they lost their the revolutionary the passion, and then they decided to what is collaborate with the CIA. That is what he talked about. And then another one is anti-intellectualism. Even though they didn't have the clear intention to collaborate with CIA, but anyway, just as a result, actually, the theoretical the work is what helped CIA, to the spread up this kind of anti-communist sentiment across the world. But and then there is anti-intellectualism there. And then he said, that this ambiguity, in particular, actually, he pointed out, the evidence, the which would support his argument is that their work is too difficult to follow. The ambiguity and the obscurity there. So he said, actually, this Western Marxism ruined the Marxism because they actually wrote too much difficult text. And then in conclusion, and this actually the difficult text separate the common people from the Marxism, and then people they began to lose their interest in Marx, or some even that they fallen into a misunderstanding of Marx, something like that. That is his logic. It is actually anti-intellectualism. You can actually see the many actually the Christian critique of Frankfurt School, or some even today's the MAGA people's critique of Western Marxism is very similar. Actually, the profound the analysis regarding this simply what is a kind of some trick to hide their intention, something like that. This is a little bit conspiracy theory. But another one is he believed in science, and he said the scientific the approach or some science must be clear, but that is exactly Stalin had in his mind. So text must be practiced as it is written. We call this kind of a movement as fundamentalism. So this kind of a tendency as a fundamentalist. So we had lots of fundamentalist movement in the flow of the history. Any actually the moment which the people experienced what is the crisis of the status quo or some kind of existing regime. Crisis of existing regime brought people to this kind of anxiety, and then they'll always try to find what is it's just a clear idea rather than the more complicated and then more open the thought to the more possibility. They try to close down their kind of gate and try to find out what is a clarified idea or clear that kind of belief. That is a fundamentalism. So of course psychologically this thing is always happening. All right, this thing always happening because we have, if you have an anxiety or some kind of unstable mind, what would you do is normally actually we try to find out some kind of comfortable feeling from what you're already familiar with. Just you want to go back to some hometown, just like this is very typical cliche. You can find out in Hollywood movie, in 1990, neoliberalism made this kind of narrative, and then people actually, the sick of became some the people working in New York Wall Street, and then they sick of their job, and then went back to the hometown, and then find out that their the real life, something like that. This is very romantic, the regression, romantic regression there. But this is quite similar. That means if you have anxiety, you want to find out more familiar, things, which was already, already give you some kind of experience. That means you don't want to actually you don't want to take actually another adventure. You want to stay in the what you already know. That is what Rockhill did. with his book. So, and then many people actually, okay, just resonated or some actually, the accommodate this kind of idea. I think would have a similar idea. We witnessed, total failure of, the previous movement. Yeah, I don't think this is a total failure, but some people would say, there's some even, the within the leftist, the group, and then people said, this digital technology, dominate people, and then social media actually snatched, the people's the revolutionary or some desire toward a new world, something like that. So this very dystopian, the image would give, some people to get back to clear idea, like, the orthodox Marxism or Stalinism, something like that. Very clear there, just like, the MAGA tried to go back to Puritanism. And then at this one, even though we have a different rhetoric, different, the idea and different, even, different the position, but you can find out, same desire, all right? This is actually what I read, in Rocker's book.
Yes, and another issue of Lukács comes up here too when you're talking about education and students, because today, especially in countries like the United States, to a lesser degree the UK, because the numbers are quite lower, still, you have now decades of students taking out student loans, believing that they're going to transcend their class through education, which during Reaganomics and Thatcherism was a thing. It's no longer that. I saw from my students at New York University from the around 96, 97, when I would be writing letters of recommendation for jobs or graduate programs, that the numbers of students coming to me for graduate school or for internships shot up. It was no longer, I'm getting a job, it's I'm getting an unpaid job. Laws had to change around that, of course, because there are ethics about a massive company, and I mean music labels getting free labor, not being beholden to pay for the person's transport, lunch, etc. So there were accommodations such as you get free lunch and your metro ticket is paid. Ridiculous. But we're seeing the rise of this kind of neoliberal gratification process where now the middle class, they are having their children go to university. They pop out with a degree, even from middling schools, and they get jobs in NGOs. And the parent says, my child works at, and everyone's supposed to say, oh, how wonderful. And these processes, I'm very critical of the NGO complex. I'm very critical of the quote unquote development industry, because it's part of this circle of destruction and reconstruction that we've seen in Iraq, Afghanistan, and my country is very easy to critique because the US has made an art form out of destroying, creating wars everywhere. We've seen it going in with their aid agencies. Of course, it's called aid agencies, never we owe you back for destroying your entire infrastructure, for murdering tens and hundreds of thousands of your citizens. But let's forget that. And then we have these graduates from Oxbridge, from Brown, Harvard, and they are developmental specialists. No critique. It's like the critique that Lukács talks about, where he says that class education is not academic instruction. It's not even the transmission of facts. He makes the argument that it's the active political process through which the working class transitions from its everyday distorted consciousness to a revolutionary understanding of society as a whole. Now, when you spoke of students, this is a paradox today where we're seeing students finishing university, being able to get jobs at Starbucks, meaning their education was for nothing. I'm sorry to put it this way. Many young kids today are making that choice. They see their siblings and their cousins and even their own parents struggle to pay off these student loans on jobs that are not paying them any better. To the contrary, we just read recently, 2 weeks ago, massive layoffs are happening now across the IT sector, the sector where in the 90s, everyone wanted to get a job because they were getting six figures often. Now you're lucky if you have a job in that sector, and they're previewing that these jobs will be cut 50% in the coming years, and then much more in a decade. So AI, to the Luddite movement in the late 18th, early 19th century with people breaking the machine. But it's not just about the machine. Why not let AI do jobs that no one wants to do? The problem isn't that. It's when I go to the supermarket checkout and I'm very aware that they're asking me to do the job of someone who is not there. Are these companies, are these supermarkets making contributions to their own workers and saying, we're laying you off, but we'll pay you this for the rest of your life? Because we know that's not happening. We know that capitalism is not making the capitalist actors beholden to their own outsourcing to machines, to their own reduction of staff. And certainly governments aren't even making any moves towards this, aside from the experimental city, or which is never a city. They do an experiment with money given out to 200,000 people during the 6-month experiment. And let's see, then we never hear about it. Mexico also did experiments to this end, reducing the work week. Again, all very good things to do. But in practicality, we're not seeing where the mega producers of these AI bots, for instance, are being forced to recognize the rights of the laborer who is necessarily left at home. This brings me back to, of course, the educated elite. No longer are the educated elite. The educated class is now facing the exact same struggles as the working class, with some differences. One could argue they have more opportunity, perhaps, because to what degree is education outside of, let's say, being an engineer? We need bridges. Being a doctor, I hope that's never put online as an online class. This has been happening across Italy, where classes are being put online. You don't need a person to teach you. You can just parrot this thing. And so the idea of class consciousness needs to be embraced by the former educated elite who are now just educated and jobless.
Yeah, actually, also I'm in the same page, and then, but I think we should get back to the basic line, the observing what's going on around today in terms of technological development. And then even Karl Marx, 19th century, he discussed this one. It's a 15th chapter of Capital, Volume 1. The machinery part is really, really actually the important discussion there. He criticized Adam Smith. Adam Smith said, if we introduce the machine into production, and lots of the labor, that means the worker, will be liberated from the toil of labor. So actually, that Adam Smith really had an optimistic view to the introduction of machine into the factory, but the Marx criticized, and he had a different idea, from the Adam Smith, and he said, okay, actually, we have, some different the mode of production, from capitalism, the worker will be liberated from the toil of work, but under the capitalist control, that means under the mode of the capitalist mode of production, and the introduction of machine wouldn't give any liberation to worker, because actually the bourgeois introduce the machine not for the liberation of a worker, but to make more profit. So in this sense, if actually this machinery produced more product, then if actually the increase the kind of productivity, but the attainment couldn't give any benefit to workers. That wouldn't help. That means that kind of the machinery, introduction machinery wouldn't help the liberation of the workers. So that is the point. Actually, that's why we should actually bear on this basic line of what Marx said. What is that? It's communism. So communism will be is reached at certain level of the kind of the development of some technology. So technology wouldn't, bring us the kind of the communism, but the communism would bring us, that kind of to liberation of the labor, from the liberation of labor. That means actually worker will be liberated from the kind of a toil of the labor. So that's why just nowadays we have the machine, we have this kind of developed, more developed in technology. And then, in my opinion, today's technology is actualization 18th century European utopianism. If you read, in those days, the utopian novels, actually published in England and then some Europe, you can find out, how the machine liberate human being from this restraint of this natural law, something like that. So, or some as Adam Smith, anticipated, also, of course, actually Marx criticized him, how the machine could actually could bring us the benefit is a common benefit, something like that. But as the Karl Marx pointed out, is because of capitalism that dream couldn't be realized. And then now that we have the same situation, even we have more advanced technology, and we have enough production, actually we have the too much productivity, but how this the actual achievement the changed our life, and then what actually kind of benefit this the advancement, the technological advancement to actually bring us the benefit the given us. So this is exactly what I want to say. So what lacks today is idea of communism. That means capitalism couldn't bring us that kind of the common benefit shared by the all kind of some advancement, but in this sense we wouldn't say that we must reject the technology, but we must revive utopian agenda of this technology. For instance, the Anders, the Anders is the famous actually the Heideggerian philosopher. He actually pointed out after Second World War, the inverted utopianism is, he said, technoscience is nothing else than the inverted utopianism. So in this sense, actually, we must, that is exactly at some point is a very similar concept to the Lukács's concept of reification. So this actually technology is reified at the moment. That's why we actually take the Lukács's concept of reification more serious way. So reification of this utopianism, the what blocked the kind of the common benefit, must be shared by all people. So in this sense, we actually organize, the some kind of movement against this sort of monopolizing the means of production, and then also the means of production means in capitalism, of course, capital. So monopolize the capital, and then we also actually emphasize, technology as such wouldn't give us any liberation, but we should actually we should actually make a certain the democratic the assemblage of this kind of technology. So in this sense, the Western Marxism also gave us some kind of insight, all right? So how can we actually, reorganize this sort of, the technology? And then, so technology is in this sense, not just instrument, but a kind of a battlefield in which we, the reified or some liberate, the technological achievement from this sort of commodity, the structure, and then reification.
Yes. And on the other side of that, of course, did Smith conceive of, if the machines do everything, who will eat and who will not? Because it's the people who own the machines. And we see this with Jeff Bezos' enormous wealth.
Sure.
You're beginning to see the criticism of the hyper wealthy on the right in the United States. It's the first time I've seen this, but you're seeing people saying, wait, why should someone be able to own more money than many countries on the planet, their GDP. How is this ethical? How is this good for humanity? And you're seeing more and more criticism of capitalism on the right of center, which is refreshing to me. At the same time, what are the answers to this? Because obviously we don't have working answers at the moment. And these experiments with universal basic income, etc., have not been adopted in a way that is going to solve the problem in the immediate future.
So we should do is a very concrete, practical project. So I don't say actually we all, organize some, the movement toward the communism. Communism, I don't think actually, kind of a ideological slogan. So that is exactly what, Marx discussed in the critique of Gotha program. And then communism is what? Sort of a qualitative transformation of our life. So that means actually our desire must be, the transformed, otherwise communism wouldn't be actually realized. So in this sense, we must organize, the concrete and differentiated project, which actually what fits in some local condition. So we must actually create the locality. We must create the local. So in the, in the middle of this kind of neoliberalized world, what is totally lost is definitely local. You couldn't find out any local in the local, place. It's only tourist, all right? Everybody turn into tourist, everybody turn into consumer. We need actually, the create or recreate local. And that is, in my opinion, important, the project. And then we need to be concrete. And then also we pursue this universal, that is a communism, in my opinion. So it's a kind of, some, the assemblage or some, if you like, dialectical, the transformation should be happening through this kind of the practice is the practice in concrete way, but you should pursue this universal idea. That is, in my opinion, ideal communism. So that's why just the communism is always exist as idea. Is that is I took the Deleuze to the philosophize this difficult the sense of practice is a transcendental empiricism. Very oxymoron is a paradox is there, but actually the practice as such is a paradox. So idea as such is pure. That means communism never realized. Okay, it never actually the experienced. Nobody can experience the communism. That's why just the Benjamin the took the concept the jet is the here and now. Just the very here and now actual temporality. It just comes up like a messiah, but it disappears, so immediately. So that is actually communism. So communism cannot be actually experienced and it cannot be realized yet, of course, but we had idea of communism because we believe in communism is true. That means that actually without communism, even capitalism cannot survive. Think about it. Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the richest guy on earth. Now I heard that he's the property more actually the increased these days. She actually what is sucking every kind of the wealth across the world. But thing is that who actually produce this wealth? It's not Elon Musk. That is irony and the paradox of capitalism. Elon Musk does not produce the wealth. But he just simply what is the summon up this actually the wealth, and then he just turn into personality, some kind of a person called Elon Musk. That is exactly Karl Marx analyzed in Capital too. Is he said the bourgeois, that means a capitalist, is not just what single individual, but what is the incarnation of the capital. So that's Elon Musk is what? It's not just individual. It's not just one American guy. He is what? He is a sort of, that kind of personalization of capital as such. So in this sense, he is what, in my opinion, of course, Althusser also said, is what? Is the master signifier of the today's regime. So we must change this master signifier. So that is the aim of our movement. And then that's why we must engage cultural, production, and then people's, desire always what is snatched by this master signifier. Everybody want to be what? Person like Elon Musk, We must stop it. That is exactly what Karl Marx also discussed in Capital. He actually analyzed Robinson Crusoe's story. And then he said Robinson Crusoe's story is typical, stereotype of bourgeois narrative. And then he said, colonialism and imperialism, nothing else than, the bourgeois desire to extend, the mirror image of the Robinson Crusoe, to the rest of the world. That is what Karl Marx said. I think actually since the 19th century, this sort of, the process never stopped and never changed, So we need actually what? Engage this kind of reproduction of Robinson rate in quite, the different level and different place, and then different, the strata. So I think actually that must be our, the practical agenda, from your own concrete experience, and then we should pursue, this idea of communism. Idea of communism must be practiced in concrete way, and then this idea of communism must be revised and reformulated and modified. This kind of dialectical process would what give us, the sort of new the world, or that is might be called is worlding. Actually, we should create new world. And then how can we create this new world? We must create new people. That is my answer.
You're listening to Savage Minds. If you're enjoying the show, take a second to subscribe at savageminds.co. Feel free to comment below or drop us a line to share your thoughts. Support independent media today. Now, let's get back to it. Let's walk back towards your previous works, notably Communism After Deleuze and Made in Nowhere. Looking back at Communism After Deleuze, you attempted to untangle a radical politics of desire and immanence from state-centric models of liberation. In light of your recent critique of Rockhill's orthodox Marxist-Leninism, how does the Deleuzian framework of decoding and deterritorialization offer a better tool for diagnosing modern global capitalism than a rigid state versus imperialism model?
In the book, actually, I wanted to reformulate concept of the communism, and then I want to return to the Marx and Engels, original conceptualization of communism. They actually made many concept of communism in the early works, and then the communism is in this sense very the different layered concept. That means it would have a multiple implication. But actually, my conclusion is that even though the Marx and Engels made a different approach to this concept, the early the work in the German ideology, Marx and Engels said, defining communism as every struggle against established order. That is communism. That is what Marx and Engels defined in the German ideology. So I think, what is the established order? Of course, state. So the communism after Deleuze, I brought up, okay, just you said in the decoding and the transcoding, as that is exactly the Deleuze and Guattari made in his in their works, is a co-authored works, is Anti-Oedipus and Thousand Plato. State is what is a kind of a transcoded plane. That means actually we discuss a lot. The what kind of social the social the actual structure or some what kind of actually the social characteristic. We are now is a state monopoly capitalism or some late capitalism, or nowadays some people said the techno feudalism or something like that. The but the Deleuze and Guattari's the analysis says that even though we have a different kind of a capitalism, but all capitalism shared same code. That means that actually the each capitalism or some each the mode of production in capital development the transcoded what already existed before. That means that actually capitalism also, the something nothing else than the transcoded system, which actually what is the borrowed from the feudalism. So actually, even capitalism already what internalized, that kind of a feudalist features or feudalist element, as far as it works for their the purpose. That is what Deleuze and Guattari said. So in this sense, state is important for the capitalism. A lot of neoliberal, actually, the theorists, and then the analysts, argue that neoliberalism is a canceling. Of course, actually, the neoliberalism is, in my opinion, benchmarking of socialism. The socialist and the globalization, which was actually happening in the 60 and then 70 in the Soviet bloc. That unfortunately this the red globalization, the collapsed because of oil shock. Now that we also experiencing similar situation. Iran, the Trump's Iran war, caused another oil shock, and then it will actually brought some kind of crisis within this world order. And then this is oil shock is in this sense very crucial actually cause of some collapse of some kind of existing regime. So, but from this perspective, I interpreted the Deleuze-Guattari's the thesis as a communist agenda. And then because they actually argue that the purpose of the political philosophy is to abolish state. So that is what exactly they are arguing. So that's why they took the concept is Urstaat. That means more like actually they quoted the Peter Vogel's actual understanding of a state, and then they said state does not come to exist. Come to exist according to the historical development. So they didn't say, the state came to exist as necessary process of, the development, historical development. So they challenge idea of progressivism, and then evolutionary idea. That's why actually the Stalin's the idea was like this. Stalin is nothing else than the socialism is final goal of history. He believed too much, he believed in too much that kind of the socialist doctrine. So socialism is the evolutionary process. So that's why he actually believed in that kind of science. So, but the Deleuze and Guattari, the criticize this kind of evolutionary idea of state. So state is not, the actual what is a historical consequence of the productive development. That means the people, that means when actually human history reached a certain level of production, and then a lot of actually, the people argue like this is a state, came to exist. But Deleuze and Guattari said, even, the people had lower level of production, the productivity, but our ancestor had, our ancestor had this kind of state. That's what despotic, state, Oriental despotism. So in this sense, actually, they said is what state is definitely symbolically announced, not just the came into exist the following of the kind of historical development. So they actually they actually separated the state from history, and then of course it might be they might actually criticize the historicism there, and then also they criticize historical evolutionism or some social evolutionism. So in this sense, and then we would have the question, if state is not, the actual historical, the byproduct of productive the development or some development of any means of actual mode of production, how can we abolish state? That is a question they raised in two books. As they also suggested, the how we could, actually abolish it. That is what exactly. So the desire, must change the desire, and then they talk about, the how to bring in, the actually the new world by inventing new people. So actually, how can we actually develop? No, sorry, actually, how can we actually invent? Invent the people, not the bringing that kind of communism, the through that kind of historical development. That is what they argue. So very radical in this sense. Of course, actually, we need more discussion. Whether what they argue is the true or not, or some more theoretical integrity and needed to engage what they propose. So anyway, but this idea really insightful in my opinion.
In your other book, Made in Nowhere, you deal heavily with the unmooring of production, globalized landscapes, and the displacement of class spatial binaries. How did the shift from nowhere of hyper-globalized displaced manufacturing prepare you conceptually for your current?
Exactly. So that is my early the project to bring in how we can create the concrete universality. So the political agenda must what must propose universal idea. Of course, actually, the practice must be concrete, but that's why I try to analyze how this kind of mode of production the stability through the kind of post-war the global or some world order. So just nowhere means in my book is Asia. Asia is actually nowhere. The in Europe in 19th century and then 20th centuries is what I mean. Actually, the Asia means the certain place outside of Roman Empire. That is actually the concept made by the Roman people. And then if you some some actual place located outside of Roman territory, it was called Asia. Asia, in this sense, Asia implied many, the meaning like Orient or some out, the ouster or some outside or some nowhere, something like that. So that's why I took this idea, and then I try to say in the collection of essay, the Asia is definitely some kind of infrastructure of global capitalism. And then since actually, if you approach this the infrastructure from perspective of the Asia, nowadays actually China, China is emerging, and then China regarded as rival to United States, something like that. But I try to challenge this typical understanding of international relation. So I would say, that actually Asia is not, the one unity. Of course, our ancestor is a, modern intellectual in the in Asia, 19th century and 20th century, they tried to create the United States of Asia. But that, the plan is failed because of Japanese, imperialism. So and after, the Second World War, of course, the United States came, and then they actually opened, the era of Pacific, rim. That means the Asia became a part of American, bloc. And then, but within Asia, even though actually, we had certain some kind of unity or some identity through this kind of the international the relation, but we don't have any, the unified identity within Asian bloc. So we couldn't have any Asian bloc because that, the project to build the United States of Asia, definitely the what is frustrated. That's kind of traumatic experience because of Japanese imperialism. So that's why just Asia is now is what is a multiplicity, exists as a multiplicity. So that is one point I try to make in the book. Another one is, of course, you said is nowadays we have some the rise of technology, but this technology also produced by some kind of what is a war machine in the Deleuze and Guattari sense. It's more like a wartime, the exceptionalism. So because actually in those days government, the funded scientists a lot, and then without limit, because they are in the middle of their warfare. So, and then this system made what? This kind of research system made today's academic structure. So in this sense, the what we have at the moment in terms of technology is definitely the byproduct of this kind of wartime emergent, system. So this is my idea. So we have, technology, AI, so-called internet. It's all, all these, the technology, what is a variation or some the commercial adaptation of that kind of military technology. So in this sense, how can we actually what is reformulate this kind of military technology or some not just a commercial way, but our own, the revolutionary way. That is I'm thinking about. So when I said, the planetary cybernetic is more like, how can we build this kind of what is a concrete universality through a reformulation of technological, the technological the technological actually apparatuses. So that's as what I'm talking about. So I said, the technology is not just the instrument. I already talk about, because what we have in terms of technology is not just one technology, one more advanced technology, or some the most the developed technology. What we have in terms of most developed technology is just one of technology we have, today. Just like that, the indigenous people's technology. What do you think about it? Is the people we quite simply actually regard, this kind of indigenous people's technology as a primitive technology. But many anthropologists who study in the Latin America discovered a different paradigm technology there. All right. So that is my idea. We need to disclose, another side of technology. For instance, today we have a semiconductor industry. But if you visit, any foundry, like the TSMC and the Samsung foundry in South Korea, TSMC in the Taiwan, you'll be surprised, actually the human being just function as kind of what is a labor power to maintain the machine. But this actually the relation is a really reversed relation, to which actually the technology originally the build up the between the technical object and the human agency. So That's what I mean. Actually, technical object is equal, but today's technology try to order this technical object as their own hierarchical power. So that is a big problem. So Elon Musk is what? Is just the top of this power? It's wrong. Is technical object is equal. So absolute equal. That is what the European Enlightenment discovered in the 17th century. That was called the scientific revolution. And then now this scientific revolution is what? Blocked by this capitalism. So we must actually what? Create the new way of technology, or in my opinion, that it's a new mode of technology always related to the new mode of existence. So that is my idea. So technology in this sense, not just the instrument, but kind of the subject matter. We must actually take on to what? You bring in the new world and then to create new people.
In Made in Nowhere, there is a haunting sense of a capitalism that is decoupled from specific geographic identities. How does this non-place capitalism intersect with your work on the repetition of China, a space that seems simultaneously hyper-localized in state power, yet ubiquitous in the global commodity chain?
So actually, now the China, my understanding is that China is not a rival to United States. China is already part of this system. United States made. That means the United States and China made this system together. In this sense, nowadays we have just some sort of actually crisis of this system, but I'm not sure actually whether that means Trump and then the United States intention successfully solve out this crisis. But that's why just if you don't have China or some vice versa, if China doesn't have a United States, what happened is this system would collapse. That's my understanding. So that's why they try to stay or sustain this status quo, as much as they can. But they wanna reshuffle the hegemonic actually the relation. That means they try to take the initiative over other the country, but it doesn't mean they decided to give up this system, or they decide to destroy, or some decide to create another system, something like that. I don't think they would have the space to create the new world, because actually they enjoyed, and they already actually enjoyed what they gain through this system. And then even I told you that the technological actually opponents wouldn't allow them to create the new world the within this kind of the order. So in this sense, the China actually insists that it's a multilateral the partition of existing world. That is what China said. Is China, in this sense, China is not alternative to this world, unfortunately. So I'm sorry about this one, but China quite different from what actually the Western left dreamt about in 1970. They more and more became a part of this capitalist system. So of course, actually, we would have a certain accidental moment, in future. I don't know what gonna happen, but anyway, we can anticipate, this system, would create or it would produce their own digger, within this system. That is what the Marx, and Engels, wrote in the Communist Manifesto. So, how can actually this system would produce the digger? Okay, just the 19th century, it might be called proletariat. What about today? In my opinion, there might be what is a people belongs to no place. People belongs to no place. Problem is, how can we summon up these people for the idea of a new world? That is task or some kind of assignment, that we have at the moment. So in this sense, the lots of analysis based on the knowledge of international relation at some point is a liberal approach to this situation. In my opinion, another, the compromising discourse to sustain this status quo. We need to have a radical perspective on what's going on today, and then we need actually more macro perspective. Actually the grand narrative, by which we can reflect on, the detailed or some concrete cases.
In your upcoming book with Polity, you offer the title, provocatively titled, Weak Technologies.
Yeah.
The term immediately evokes Gianni Vattimo's weak thought, pensiero debole, but shifts the ontology to technical systems. Could you define what a weak technology is and how it challenges our standard narratives of technological omnipotence and mastery?
Yeah, that concept is related to what I have, discussed here. And then weak technology, in this sense, actually, my own term is the political philosophy, the weak technology. So philosophy means, the thinking machine, in Kantian sense. A human being as such, a thinking machine, thinking automata, what Kant defined. So philosophy, in this sense, philosophy is a machine. And then with this machine, we can think about technology. And then technology always is open to any technical object. That means that technology must be practical. But the science is a little different. Science always pursues truth. And then truth is always is a contradictory. That means actually for instance, some doctor said, coffee is good for your health, and some scientists would say coffee is harmful for your health. But of course, actually, coffee would be both, the harmful or beneficial for your health. But just like that is a scientific truth. But technological, the technological practice, nothing to do with this truth, but more like a political, or some ethical, the value. So, but in this sense, the technology is always open to any possibility. But what about today's technology? Today technology really fastest, the orientation. What I mean, I already told you that, the military purpose there. That's why just this kind of a paradigm is called the scientific technoscience. So this is actually the technoscience. Technoscience means that scientific truth is what? It's fixed on technological purpose. That means actually the science only exists for what? Is one, the dimension of technological, use. That is, in my opinion, the dangerous situation we have, at the moment in terms of technology. That is AI, the AI industry. So what I mean, actually, the technology always needs a maintenance, and then repair or some care, That means the machine is always wearing away, something like that. So you must You must take care machine, or you must repair it, or some maintaining any, the circumstance, to retain that kind of technological, the move. So, but the today's the technoscience, hides this truth of technological practice. So that means actually the machine look like what is autonomous, and the machine actually symbolize the kind of hyper, the hyper level of the kind of life, or some completeness and the perfectionism, something like even beauty these days. Actually, this is, in my opinion, is more, the abstract level of the technology, and then this abstract level of technology turn into what is a practical sense of technology. That is really what we have at the moment, in terms of artificial intelligence industry. And then we are witnessing all over the world, using this kind of smartphone, and then, social media, and then computer. And then you can see the, this kind of many, the slope, the artificial intelligence slope. And then that is exactly actually some technology is snatched by this kind of capitalist the purpose is making profit, not its own the capacity. I told you that is that the original capacity of technology is openness. That is what I called weakness. So weak technology is what? Weak technology are always there. So every technology is weak, but scientific, techno-scientific paradigm, what is the techno-scientific the paradigm blind us, from this kind of reality of technology, or some prevent us from this kind of capacity of technology. So we need to restore this capacity of technology. That means openness and weak technology. What is weak technology then? My idea is an artistic experiment, art as such, poem or some literature or some artistic performance. And then all artistic experiment is the realization of the kind of, the weak technology. So weak technology in this sense, could be regained through this kind of, artistic experiment or some radical, the practice of this technology.
How does the thesis of weak technologies reshape the traditional Marxist critique of the productive forces? For instance, if technology is fundamentally weak, then what does it mean for the classical accelerationist dream of repurposing strong capitalist machinery for communist ends, which is built on a philosophical misunderstanding? Or what does this mean for that theory?
It's a good question. Yeah, weak technology is really, really actually in my own competence, with my own competence, actually the very Marxist term, because Marx, discussed this one in his analysis of Robinson Crusoe, Robinson Crusoe, and he said, what Robinson Crusoe realized in the desert island is not his own capacity, but what he learned and what he had, in those days is what? From social relation. So that is exactly Marx discovered. Labor is what? Social relation. Social. That means that every labor is social. That is labor. That means you cannot make anything alone. You must bring in any, the kind of technology or any device, any instrument from where? Social relation. So in this sense, weak technology means that technology is always social, right? Not just Elon Musk's, the ownership. It's not just Elon Musk's property. It's technology is always social. That's why just the weak technology means that the attempt or some practice to reveal this social aspect of technology, that is exactly, in my own term, capacity of technologies, openness, and the weakness of technology. Actually, indigenous people, they already had, of course, actually this technology simply regarded, in early modern society, primitive, technology, but they had, their own technology. For instance, Malayu in the 11th century and the 14th century in, the Southeastern Asia, they had their own sailing, the technology quite different from European technology. Why? Because they have different climate. The European, sailing technology always related to their own climate. For instance, what is a Mediterranean? Okay, but the Malayu, that means today's Malay is the Malaysian people, and then today's Malay, the Malayu in those days actually developed their own technology, the sailing technology, because they had different climate. This is weak technology, right? So In this sense, we have what is a different technology because we have different social relation, and then that's why the technology always the weak, because the reason why actually what is technology is always social.
And does this weakness offer a new strategy for resistance, subversion, or even sabotage within automated networks? Or is it a description of an inescapable ontological condition?
So actually, the weakness is ontological condition of technology. That's why just otherwise technology doesn't work. Think about it. Think about that. If you buy any electronic device, you buy some vacuum cleaner, something like that, and then what would you do first? You just simply switch the on, and then the use it. All right, simply use it, and you don't read the manual very carefully. Of course, we have a guide. If you buy any the electric device, you must read the manual. But I don't think many people do that. Even me, actually, I don't do that. It's just that I try that the device, and then if that device doesn't work in intuitive way, what happened to you? You actually try to find that information in manual book, something like that. So in this sense, the technology works without knowledge, and then if you actually find out something wrong, in your practice with technology, you would try to find out solution by taking some knowledge. That is my point. In this sense, technology is really, really what is a kind of proletarian way. It's more like what intuitive way, but this intuition always related to what is a technical object. So this is, in my opinion, is the evidence which tell us, technology is quite relational. It means it's not just established, it's not completed, not until it is used. That is what I mean. Actually, it's practical and then relational, and it cannot be actually realized by its own, pre-given knowledge.
I'm thinking to your other work because more recently, in fact, you've shifted your focus significantly towards AI and planetary cybernetics. Traditional cybernetics sought homeostatic control through feedback loops. How does planetary cybernetics change this scale? And what happens when the feedback loop is no longer managing a discrete system, but instead it's governing even the entire metabolic infrastructure of the planet?
Yeah, it's a good question. Is my own idea is a planetary cybernetic is the kind of the material condition for my own sense of universal system, which could be which could actually actualize or realize the kind of idea of communism in quite different sense. So because cybernetic is based on the communication theory, all right. So actually, that is exactly given by the two mathematician is the Robert Wiener and Claude Shannon. Um, Ironically, actually, the both are funded by the OSS. But anyway, so but they actually found out the all kind of the system is related to the communication, ontologically. So in this sense, the planetary cybernetic means, the something, the agenda, something like agenda to go beyond the nation state system. So we already have this kind of, the planetary system, which was connected, by global technology. All right. So we are talking through this kind of machine and then this technology. Okay. This might be called communication. But this is what I mean. It's more like a nodal the connection, and then but through this kind of nodal connection, we can gain the certain some relational contact. Is that is what I want to say. So through this kind of relational contact, we can communicate many different idea, and then this actual planetary the dimension would the bring up the kind of the something beyond that limit of a nation state. That's what I'm thinking about. So, of course, this is a very preliminary idea, but what I what I could do, what we could do actually at the moment is, the bring in some kind of idea of a concrete universality, and then my own idea is how can we build, the alternative system to the AI industry, and then my actually, the imagination went to that kind of a concept of planetary cybernetics.
I'm thinking of how many contemporary theorists view AI as a tool of hyper extractivism and cognitive capitalism. Again, similar to Smith and others, many believe that this is always going to be a good thing without thinking about the trickle down ramifications for a world population that is not Jeff Bezos. How will these people live? How will they organize? Especially in an era where organization is now largely online, but you can be shadow banned on Twitter and other social media platforms. Therefore, you have a voice superficially, but on the back end, your voice has been muffled, muted. Given your background in radical political theory, do you see any latent unintended communist potential buried within planetary scale computation? Or is it purely an apparatus of total capture?
Yeah, actually, I think it has some ambiguous relation. That's why I suggest planetary cybernetics. The negation and affirmation, but my actual position more like affirmative. Affirmative. Actually, because I believe that all these actually the product. That means even they exploited the Chinese girls in the China, and then were some the people in the global south. But anyway, it's more like I'm becoming the Hegelian when I talk about this topic. It's more like what is this production is what is organized by these people, right? So actually, the people's power is always there. And another thing is that quite different from the traditional sense of a mass and its relationship to elite or some in Leninist sense of a Bolshevik party. My actually my understanding is that the people is already organized. That is a function of a media. So people is already organized. They don't need any elite party these days. It doesn't mean we don't need a party. We have party. That means that they already have party. That means each people will be called party. But if you read Lenin's theory of a Bolshevik, is what is to be done, is that pamphlet. I think he had quite different image from what we generally believed in terms of Bolshevik. The Lenin said, we must organize people. He didn't say like that. He said, what is the role of party? And his actually the suggestion was that the party is the kind of the herb is information platform, something like that, and then on which we share is illegal secret with each member. So that is interesting. This is my interpretation. It didn't put this kind of word, but actually this is my interpretation. From today's perspective, you can read that pamphlet like this. And he said illegal information. What is this illegal information? Kind of secretly shared by people. So nowadays we don't have this secret. Only the group what is a fascist group. Only far right group has this secret. Do you understand? This illegal secret. So leftists fail to make this illegal secret. I think that might be my question. Why we actually lost? Why the left actually lost? This kind of illegal secret. Of course, actually, I don't say I don't want to go actually that kind of direction. The today's left is too corrupted, and then today's left is losing their morality, something like that. But what I mean, actually, that's why we need a Hegelian perspective, about this kind of historical transformation. So that's why I said this is ambiguous. Why don't we have no secret anymore? Because of this technological development. But in this sense, what is this? What is the political meaning of this technological development? The people already organize. They're organized based on fandom. It's like a Korean pop, fandom. Think about that. They organized. Actually, when the former president in South Korea declared martial law, just the young people, they are based on this fandom. They actually organize themselves based on this Korean pop idol. They came out on the street. Actually, my friend, one of my friends told me that is voluntary and, the passion and then not organized, blah, blah. That is exactly very traditional understanding of mass. But my idea and my actually experience to observe them is quite different from. They are well organized and then much organized than even, military army. That's why actually the martial law is really quite quickly lifted, by the actual parliament the agreement, something like that. So that's what I mean. Actually, this mass already organized, and then they had their own agenda. But problem is they don't have any secret because we leftist group, couldn't find out, the way to create this kind of illegal secret, to be shared by these organized people. That's what I'm talking about. Planetary cybernetics and the weak technologies. How can we actually bring in? It doesn't mean we must organize, the more people, and then more people would change the world. But we would know that already, but we cannot actually we cannot accept it. But a number of people wouldn't say anything. All right, wouldn't change the world.
Right. And I'm also thinking about, in terms of your notion of the secret, I'm thinking as an anthropologist here of the confession culture that has grown quite common since the talk show era of the 1980s, with the personal is political from feminism, and these rather corrosive subgroups, and I do include feminism in this, which divide people along identitarian lines. So now all we have to do is have this confession of, I identify as fill in the blank, and that becomes the person who claims their victimhood through this quasi-Foucauldian confession, because you're confessing actually to no crime. There is no crime.
Sure.
You're not guilty of anything. You're confessing the guilt of your oppressor. There's no class at all. You are exclaiming their guilt towards you because you identify, here are your pronouns. And all class consciousness is gone out the window. And I'm thinking about the way in which what used to be personal secrets, now homosexuality, no longer do you have to make that a secret that you keep until death. You parade it. It's capitalized. Now, if you go to New York every summer, you'll see the gay pride parade, but it will look like a publicity stunt for all of major radio stations, websites, and of course, Broadway theater. What could be gayer than Broadway theater? It's almost ridiculous and a caricature of itself. But I'm wondering about the concept of the subject within planetary cybernetics, within online culture even, and the alienation of the liberal subject. Deleuze gave us the individual of the control society. What kind of subjectivity is produced by planetary AI networks that operate largely beneath human consciousness?
So actually, the Deleuze, the subjectivity is just effect of this sort of movement. So it's a more actually important thing is not just the subject. It's more like what is. That's why you described, and when you described is definitely show that why actually Deleuze and Guattari really skeptical of subject, so-called the subject. The more like a individual subject. So in this sense, they talk about ritornelle is more like the rhythm, repetition is a refrain, is that means very collective one. If actually they talk about subjectivity, the subjectivity must be collective. So the task we should actually affirm at the moment is how can about how can we actually create this kind of collective subjectivity. In this sense, I repeatedly use this term, create and invent. So create, invent is not, the voluntary sense. Of course, actually, our voluntary, will, does not actually belong to our subject. Subject is always what? Created by this will. That means the will does not belong to us. Will actually exist outside of, our subjectivity. Okay, Georg Lukács would call this jouissance. Is a repetition. It's this repetition. That means repetition wouldn't stop us there. So repeat. That means if you repeat, and you cannot stay in the status quo. If you are actually just the gender activist, and you must repeat, what actually we did before. So otherwise, we try to what? Reduce actually today's experience to what you already the kept up. That means actually you try to put a cap on that kind of experience. That is wrong. That is dogmatism. Or so that would be what is just helpful for those people who try to stay in status quo. So what Deleuze and Guattari try to say is that what? You must change status quo. And then that is a repetition. And then that is more like, according to Deleuze, is the energetic, the energy, the flow, like energy flow is he adopted that kind of the thermodynamic theory to explain to how this kind of movement is, create the different dimension of actually the being, something like that. That is called becoming in philosophical sense. So becoming is, in this sense, what is the ontological condition of our existence. So keep becoming. It's not just the relativism, but keep becoming is really what is ontological, ontological manifesto. So in this sense, they emphasize the rhythm. So we cannot sing same song, right? We could actually sing a song. That means we could sing a same, the melody, and then, but we cannot repeat same rhythm. Even we cannot, even though actually that the song is the same, but we cannot perform same song. That means singing a song means actually the repetition, in every moment. That is, according to Deleuze and Guattari, actually the collective subjectivity. As in their own term is group subject. Group subject. That is a party, very reformulated sense of Leninist concept. Yeah.
In your essay, The Repetition of China, for the Made in China journal, you recount a young scholar telling you that using Western Marxism to analyze China feels like, quote, wearing a garment tailored for another body, end quote. If Western theory sits so awkwardly on the contemporary Chinese context, what new conceptual toolkit must we build to understand its contradictions?
In the article, I try to formulate new theory of China, and a lot of people, they already discussed it. And then China is a rival to Europe, and then China is otherness, to the European civilization, or the China and West, or something like that. But I challenge this dichotomy. So my idea is that China is a mirror image of Europe. And then because actually Europe did a lot of things since the 17th century to imitate China. So if you read in Leibniz letter and then Samuel Johnson, 18th century, and they all kind of actually the European metaphysics or some so-called philosophy, and take the China as challenge to their the theoretical actually doctrine. So even Leibniz, definitely actually and then so even Hegel actually discussed China is almost all the philosopher discuss China. That is evidence. What I mean actually they established their own identity against China. Okay, but that is, in my opinion, ideological, you know. But what happened today? But the modern society, I told you, the modern society based on absolute equality of technical object. That is a technological turn. So, and then in this sense, China is what the participating in this system because of the imperialism, colonialism, and then expansion of European civilization. Anyway, China is gradually imitated the European civilization, which they didn't have. That is actually that moment marked Chinese Revolution, which happened in 1905 and in the Guangzhou. Of course, actually the long way to go to complete the first the revolution in China, but the China actually did this revolution following French Revolution. That's why actually they put that means now this Republic of China moved into the Taiwan. All right, that's why Taiwan flag show that three colors. The white, the red, and the blue. That is actually the it showed that they followed. The Republic of China followed the French Revolution and the idea. But I think this is modern China. So, but people actually, there is some experts or some intellectual theorists in West still actually, the thought China as, the some different partner, different actually the party from the European politics. But my own idea is that China is already part of this world system. And after the 1970, when Nixon visited, Beijing, and that is exactly so China started to, joined this system in the 1980 and then 1990, and then gradually China became a part of this world. So that made today's China. That's my argument. And then, in this sense, when China, I analyzed actually photo, the very important photo actually the when the American photographer took the photo, when the Chinese boy drinking Coca-Cola on the Great War. I think that is very symbolic, the image, that means that the Chinese the boy and Coca-Cola. That means the Chinese communism and Coca-Cola. That actually what is a marked the beginning of postmodernism. So postmodernism, in my opinion, nothing else than the post the dichotomy between Europe and China, or some West and China. But in this sense, the nowadays problem emerged from this kind of reality. But China still believe that they are kind of representative of Asia. But I also challenge this, the Chinese the nationalism. So I don't want to say that actually China is representative of Asia, or China as such is not Asia, because China already belong to this actually world system. So China is one of country in Asia. So in my own term, Asia is a more abstract, the concept than the China. China is really the concrete, the name of a nation state called China. Of course, actually, China has a lot of problem. The China as a nation state has a lot of problem. So, but anyway, but it's not actually the empire anyway at the moment. So it's a very the strange and the in my opinion state. You can find out reality of China today. But anyway, just in this sense, the China could be understood through the perspective of Asia. That is my idea. So, in this sense, I try to reconceptualize the term, postmodernism. So, postmodernism means, the Chinese participation in the world system, and then that actually what is made all kind of hybridity, and then all kind of the cultural multiplicity, and then pluralism, and then China actually made this sort of new order. That is or some aesthetic experience.
To bring this all together, from your rejection of ideological manipulation theories through weak technologies to your work on China and AI, if the horizon of the 21st century is unstable, planetary cybernetic capitalism running on weak automated systems, what does the word communism mean to you today? Is it a rupture from this matrix, or something that emerges from its internal repetitions?
So actually, what I want to say is communism is failed. That's what I want to say. But you ought to know that, only human being can learn something from the failure. The machine couldn't do that, right? It's not my word. It's many engineer and many scientists and mathematician they actually confirmed this one. So the failure. So actually the history of communism is a history of failure. But in this sense, we could say, communism turned into idea. To understand, actually, communism already experienced. I'm not just idealist, I'm at some point empiricist. So empiricist, I'm at some point. It's in this sense, communism, the experiment of communism already experienced. That's why we can get idea. So we have now idea of communism, even though we have lots, the counter propaganda against, the communism, anti-communist sentiment. Even we have some strong, the Christian, the Christian orientation. That means a far right Christian orientation against the China these days. But this idea is still living, and then also we have this technology. In my opinion, technology is actually today's technology. Actually, I told you that realization of 18th century utopian communism in Europe. So now we have more like a inverted, the version of this utopianism, and then that means that people had this desire to bring in the better society. And then, but without this technological, the mediation, we couldn't actually bring in, the better society. That's what I'm thinking. So I don't want to say that we should actually go back to the, the pre-technological age or some. I don't actually support the Luddite, the idea against the technology, but we would have many possibility of technology, and then technology does not actually work as dominant paradigm. So we need to have another paradigm of technology. That is what I want to say is planetary cybernetics. So this is actually at some point is really the universal the idea over this technology. But nowadays, this technology I already explained is what snatched by capitalism, and then that's why just we need actually to put a distinction between capitalism and use of technologies. So that's my idea. So with technology in this sense, way in which we can produce different the sensibility, and then how can we actually produce this different sensibility through this kind of technologies. That's actually my own term is weak technology. So the might be some people would raise a question, how this technological practice could be connected to the political philosophy or political agenda. Think about that. that is exactly what liberalism did. Thomas Hobbes thought, state is machine, and then Leviathan is nothing else than is a kind of automata. And then he actually brought in this idea of what? Idea of a state based on this kind of technology. So it's of course, actually, he tried to create it, the republic, and then the taking of this kind of technological imagination. So in this sense, actually, the understanding of political philosophy always connected to what? Technology and the machine. And then this one also, I think, would give us another chance to the practice idea of communism. And that might be our future. Otherwise, we're gonna be what? We're gonna be actually, the suffering from the kind of a capitalist exploitation, and then this kind of system, the keep actually the making a working class useless, and keep actually what is separated the people from the capacity of technology. That is nothing else than reification of our class consciousness.